advertising units on the web. Social networking CPMs were way under indexed, and just in the last year and a half, they've begun to punch their weight from a pricing standpoint, which is part of the reason that market is pretty healthy for a major player in that space. I'm going to skip over this content creation slide because Joanne Bradford from Man Media is going to do a better job of talking about this than I am, and I'm running out of time. And I do want to focus on a couple things. I think we should all be, we're in a very difficult time of a lot of economic uncertainty. Pretty lucky in Silicon Valley. We have a lot of positive things going on. We're living through a once in every 10 to 20 years technology cycle, the mobile computing cycle, smartphones and tablets just outshipped PCs in the fourth quarter of last year. The Windows operating system fell to being installed on less than 50% of internet-enabled devices in early 2010. And in what looked like a market that the U.S. was not going to lead in, America is winning in a big way. Smartphone operating systems are up to 64% share of global smartphones that are shipped around the world in 2011, up from 5% 5 years ago, and the trend is still moving in the right direction. To the numbers I went through earlier, nearly 1 billion smartphone users in a 6 billion market, so a lot of upside, I think, for this whole category. Pace of innovation in Silicon Valley may be unprecedented. I've never seen the kind of intensity, focus, and leadership at companies like Apple, Google, Amazon.com that are all going for part of the same business, and the combination of technology improvements and elegant design may be unprecedented. A couple of mega trends that are a mega trend. I think when people look back at this era that we're living in now, in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, they'll say that this is the time when people around the world got empowered via connected mobile devices. This is Twitter data that looks at the Japanese earthquake in March of 2011. These are the tweets to and from around the world, Japan, in and out of Japan, over a 16-minute period when the tsunami hit. The ability to get real-time, fast, and broad information flow is only going to get more dramatic. Remote locations are getting connected. I was surprised by this stat that more people have cellular access or signals than are connected to the electrical grid. There are 200 million farmers in India that are receiving government payments and subsidies via their mobile devices, so able to connect in a way that they couldn't before. And this is something a lot of you probably haven't focused on, but I think it's important, especially when we look at the geopolitics of what we're dealing with right now with the debt loads in Europe and slowing economies around the world. The world is more connected than it's ever been. 24% of world trade is cross-geography, up from 10% in the 1960s. So in many ways, at a meta level, when you think about the superpowers in the world, we're more codependent than ever. And while there are a lot of forces in smaller places around the world, the codependence is actually good, I think, for all of us. And it's part of the connectivity that we're certainly focusing on in the internet with social networks, etc. Authentic identity, this will be one of the big topics of the next 10 years. There's a good part, there's a bad part, there's an ugly part. But I think that in a world with tremendous uncertainty, owing to the rapid ramp and always-on connected citizens of the world, perhaps the world is on the cusp of being safer than ever. This is a discussion that requires more than the remaining 2 minutes I don't have, but I just wanted to throw that out there and focus on some economic data points and then wrap up. Every data point I'm going to focus on highlights that there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. This is a measure of volatility called the VIX that investors look at that indicates how volatile stocks are, the publicly traded companies. And it is at a very, very high level. Not a record high, but it's way higher than average right now. That illustrates a lot of uncertainty. Consumer confidence is well below historical averages, also illustrating uncertainty. U.S. corporate capital spending budgets fell in the third quarter, also illustrating uncertainty of CFOs and CEOs of major companies saying, you know what, I think we should probably spend a little less given the business outlook. GDP growth forecasts around the world have been revised downward, and growth rates are typically forecast to be lower in the next couple of years than they were in 2010. The stock market, in my experience, is the smartest leading indicator of where the economy is going to go. And you can look at some patterns here beginning in 2010, trending up and trending down and trending up for a long period of time. We lived in a pretty good 2010 sort of time frame. Things began to turn down at the beginning of the year, largely because of the European debt situation. We've had a good 2 weeks. So on that note, we can say we've had a good 2 weeks. So if this trend line continues, we're in good shape. And John may want to ask me about that later, but I think that's something you should all watch pretty religiously. Last thing, we wrote a report called USA 8 that looks at America's financial statements and where we are. I did it just because I was curious and I didn't understand it. I have a better understanding of it now. The red line looks at our country's expenses as a percent of GDP. The green line looks at our country's revenue as a percent of GDP. We are the largest gap between revenue and expenses we've had during peacetime in the history of our country. And you all are taxpayers, and a lot of your taxes, you need to know where they're going, and you need to figure out whether you're happy that that's where they're going. You need to pay attention, and you need to have a voice on it, in my humble opinion. And on a sobering note, this looks at America's debt level relative to other countries. And I will let you do the math, but we are just behind Ireland, and we are just ahead of Portugal and Iceland. And I'll let you do the math. And with that, that's the report. That's where you can find it. And I have closing thoughts, John, before you jump up here in your fabulous Alexander McQueen jacket. On the economy, one of the things I've learned is it's often darkest before dawn. At least we know what the problems are. Now we need to resolve to fix them. Across the board, sacrifices is needed. We've all worked at companies where the companies didn't recognize their problems. That's the worst situation. Once they say we have a problem, things can oftentimes get better. In the tech industry, we live in absolutely unprecedented times. We're all pretty lucky. And to quote Rudyard Kipling, if you can keep your head above, when you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. And I'll leave it with that. It's good to be humble and appreciate how lucky we are, and not think that your business is worth more than it really may be, or you'll get yourself in trouble. And with that, John, thank you.